Good morning. Unifor has been calling for the safe reopening of borders using rapid testing and dynamic quarantine. The Canadian Federation of Independent Business has called for the expanded use of rapid screening to avoid further lockdowns. The Canadian Council for Aboriginal Business has partnered with the Canadian Chamber of Commerce, the Retail Council of Canada, and the CFIB to collectively ask the Trudeau government to present a national strategy. These groups have been documenting the massive consequences of lockdowns on workers, small businesses, and their millions of employees across Canada. In their words, it is neither socially or economically sustainable to rely heavily on rotating lockdowns while we wait for an effective vaccine to be widely administered in the coming year. I agree. That's why today Canada's Conservatives are calling on the Liberals to table, within 20 days, a clear, data-driven plan to support gradually, safely, and permanently lifting COVID-19 restrictions. The President of the United States and the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom have both released public plans for economic reopening. But Mr. Trudeau refuses to give Canadians clarity on whether and when regular and social life will be able to resume, and under what circumstances and conditions. Which measures will help make the determination? And what will that reopening look like? Après plus d'un an de difficultés, les Canadiens méritent des réponses claires. Les Canadiens doivent savoir à quoi s'attendre de leur gouvernement. Est-ce que les familles vont pouvoir faire des plans pour cet été? Est-ce que les entreprises du secteur du tourisme et de l'hôtellerie vont pouvoir enfin planifier leur saison? The federal government has advised of the need for temporary COVID-19 restrictions to alleviate pressures on the public health system, including by the Prime Minister on 3 separate occasions since November 2020. Surely, if the Prime Minister can call for greater restrictions, he can also indicate the conditions and plan for a safe and responsible reopening. Le gouvernement fédéral a tous les outils nécessaires pour soutenir une réouverture sécuritaire. Je pense aux tests de dépistage rapide, au partage des données sur la propagation de la COVID-19 et à la distribution des vaccins. Ces outils doivent faire partie de la solution pour remplacer les restrictions, notamment dans les secteurs sous responsabilité fédérale comme les voyages aériens et les frontières. COVID-19 restrictions have had serious economic and mental health impacts on Canadians. The rise of mental health issues, addictions, and overdoses have become the pandemic of tears within the COVID-19 pandemic. There isn't a Canadian whose family hasn't been impacted by the mental health challenges during this pandemic, my own included. L'isolement est intolérable. Chez les jeunes, le stress, l'anxiété et les problèmes de santé mentale montent en flèche. La violence conjugale et les problèmes de toxicomanie augmentent aussi. More people have died of drug overdoses in British Columbia in this last year than from COVID-19. Canada's Conservatives will introduce a Canada Mental Health Action Plan and boost funding partnerships with the provinces for mental health care. We will provide incentives to employers to provide better mental wellness coverage to their employees. And we will create a nationwide 3-digit suicide prevention hotline. We will also introduce a plan to restore the 1 million jobs lost during the pandemic within 1 year. Jobs in all sectors of the economy and in all regions of this great country. La solution est facile. Il faut un plan pour régler les problèmes de santé mentale et stopper l'isolement lié au confinement. Il faut aussi un plan pour remettre les gens au travail et rouvrir l'économie au grand complet. But we can't begin to solve the quiet crisis of mental health without first having a plan to end the isolation of lockdowns. And we can't get Canadians back to work without certainty around when and how we can reopen. This is the first critical step Canadians deserve, and they deserve to know the plan. It's why we're calling today on the Liberal government to take immediate action and table a plan within 20 days to restore the hope Canadians need. Thank you. Merci beaucoup.
And we'll now take questions. Starting with questions on the phone, we'll have time for 8 questions total today, 4 on the phone, 4 in the room. Nous allons maintenant prendre les questions. Commençons par les questions au téléphone. Nous avons le temps de prendre 8 questions aujourd'hui. 4 au téléphone, 4 dans la salle. Opératrice, avons-nous une première question?
Certainement, merci. Alors, veuillez appuyer sur étoile 1 si vous avez une question. Please press star 1 if you have a question. Notre première question est de Lina Dip de la presse canadienne. À vous la parole.
Bonjour, M. O'Toole. J'aimerais entendre votre opinion sur le professeur Attaran et ce qu'il a eu à dire ces derniers jours sur Twitter. Il continue encore la nuit dernière à en rajouter et ce que l'université fait ou ne fait pas à propos de son cas.
Merci pour la question. Je suis déçu par la situation en ce qui concerne le professeur Attaran. Les Québécois et Québécoises ne sont pas racistes et j'aimerais voir une approche plus sérieuse par un professeur comme ça.
Et pour ce qui est du recteur et du fait que M. Attaran n'a aucune sanction en fait pour ce qu'il dit, ça, vous en pensez quoi? Je pense qu'entre autres, en fin de semaine, il me semble que votre congrès s'est penché sur la liberté d'expression sur les campus universitaires. Alors ça, vous en pensez quoi du fait qu'il puisse le dire sans qu'il y ait de conséquences?
La liberté d'expression est important. C'est une valeur pour notre société, mais c'était inacceptable pour un professeur d'avoir une approche comme ça contre les Québécois et Québécoises. J'aimerais voir une approche plus sérieuse, plus intelligente par un professeur pour nos jeunes.
Opératrice, next question.
Merci. Notre prochaine question nous vient de Marie Vastel du Devoir. À vous la parole. Please go ahead.
Oui, bonjour, M. O'Toole. J'aimerais revenir sur votre congrès de cette fin de semaine et la résolution sur les changements climatiques qui a été rejetée par vos membres, par vos délégués. Vous dites que vous comptez déposer un plan climatique d'ici l'élection, mais il y a plus de la moitié de votre parti qui n'en veut visiblement pas de plan contre les changements climatiques, en tout cas si on utilise ce terme. Comment est-ce que vous comptez trouver un équilibre entre ces 54%-là de vos membres et votre volonté à vous d'avoir un plan climatique pour la prochaine élection? Allez-vous être contraint de tempérer votre plan et de ne pas présenter grand-chose finalement parce que c'est ce que souhaitent vos membres?
Merci, Marie. Je suis le chef, je suis en charge et c'est un enjeu important pour moi. On va avoir une politique claire et sérieuse sur les changements climatiques dans la prochaine élection. C'est important pour moi comme un député, chef de l'opposition, mais comme un père de famille aussi. C'est pourquoi nous sommes en train de créer une politique spécifique pour le réchauffement climatique. On doit réduire les émissions de gaz à effet de serre tout en respectant une relance économique dans chaque secteur, dans chaque région de notre pays. Et on va avoir un plan et c'est important pour les Canadiens et Canadiennes. Sure. I'm the leader, and this is an important issue facing Canadians. And we will have a serious and comprehensive plan on climate change and the environment in the next election. That is clear, and it's something our caucus supports. We can have a plan to reduce emissions while also making sure we support an economic recovery in all sectors of the country and in all regions of the country. Mr. Trudeau prefers to tax. We prefer to partner with provinces, with employers to get the balance right. We need to do it for our society. It's important to me as leader. It's important to me as a father of young children.
Follow-up?
Oui, je je comprends que vous dites que vous êtes le chef, mais êtes-vous essentiellement en train de dire aux 4000 délégués qui se sont réunis cette fin de semaine que tout ça, c'était pour rien parce que c'est vous qui allez tout décider? Il y a déjà des gens qui se sont confiés au Toronto Star ou à d'autres journaux qui sont inquiets d'un plan climatique conservateur. Ils ne sont pas d'accord. Donc, comment est-ce que vous comptez équilibrer tout ça? Et si c'est de simplement dire « je suis chef, je fais ce que je veux », craignez-vous qu'il y ait des répercussions pour vous?
Le débat est clos. On va avoir une politique pour l'environnement dans la prochaine élection avec un plan de réduire nos émissions. Point final. C'est important. La résolution a eu beaucoup d'éléments et c'était une résolution dont 34 pendant le Congrès et on a eu des débats sur une relance économique, sur la sécurité publique. Mais comme j'ai dit dans mon discours, on doit changer sur quelques enjeux pour le bien-être des Canadiens, pour atterrir les Canadiens et Canadiennes dans la prochaine élection. Et je vais faire ça comme chef. As I said in my speech, we are going to make sure we address the needs of Canadians in 2021, and that means we're going to make some changes and have stronger and clearer policies as we grow the confidence of Canadians in the next election. Climate change is an important subject that Canadians want to see that we have a serious plan on. We will have that. Mr. Trudeau has actually been failing on his plan and now broke his promise about tripling his carbon tax. We will have a clear and comprehensive plan on reducing emissions while also making sure Canadians get back to work with our plan to get Canada moving again after the pandemic.
Opératrice, prochaine question.
Merci. Notre prochaine question est de Hélène Buzetti, des Coop de l'information. À vous la parole. Please go ahead.
Oui, bonjour, M. O'Toole. Juste simplement, vous l'avez compris comment, le rejet par les militants de cette motion en fin de semaine?
C'était une résolution complète avec beaucoup d'éléments. Mais pour notre caucus, pour tous nos députés, l'environnement est une priorité. Et on va avoir une politique sérieuse. Et nous sommes en train de parler sur ça comme une caucus maintenant. Nous sommes en train de parler avec les experts, avec les entreprises maintenant, parce qu'on doit avoir une approche sérieuse et ciblée sur une réduction des émissions tout en respectant notre économie et une relance économique.
Mais vous n'avez pas vraiment répondu à la question. Vous dites que c'est complexe. Pourquoi pensez-vous que vos militants l'ont rejeté, cette motion? Et vous êtes essentiellement en train de dire que vous allez faire à votre tête. Pensez-vous que vous pouvez rester chef après l'élection si jamais vous n'êtes pas élu et que vous aurez fait à votre tête malgré la volonté des militants?
Les changements climatiques est un enjeu primordial pour notre société, pour moi et pour nos membres. Et on a eu un débat sur quelques politiques. C'était une résolution avec quelques éléments et c'était un peu compliqué parce qu'il y a des champs de compétences provinciales et fédérales en ce qui concerne l'environnement. On doit avoir une approche en collaboration avec les provinces, avec les grands émetteurs et c'était trop prescriptif pour nos membres, la résolution, mais je vais être clair encore. Je vais avoir une politique sérieuse et ciblée sur une réduction des émissions de gaz à effet de serre dans la prochaine élection. C'est important pour moi.
Opératrice, next question.
Merci. Our next question is from Nigel Newland from City News. Please go ahead. À vous la parole.
Good morning, Mr. O'Toole.
Good morning.
You've been very clear that you believe that in China, the Uyghur situation constitutes genocide. I'd like to know whether or not you believe what happened to Indigenous people in Canada constitutes genocide.
I've said many times, Nigel, that our history with respect to First Nations, Indigenous Canadians has been horrific. And the situation of residential schools in particular was horrific. And historically was a way to try and assimilate and to have a cultural genocide in the early days of our nation. I was very proud when a Conservative Prime Minister apologized for that in the House of Commons and launched the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. My first question as Leader of the Opposition was on one of the health recommendations from the Truth and Reconciliation report. So this is a priority for me, and I think reconciliation means that we learn from some of the horrific chapters of our past and engage with Indigenous Canadians to make sure that they have full participation, full opportunity, and that we don't just make promises on safe drinking water like the Prime Minister did with no plan to deliver. What First Nation leaders expect from a Prime Minister is partnership and a serious plan that can achieve objectives, not just words that have no follow through.
So just to be clear, when you look at residential schools, the 6B scoop, forced sterilization, the Indian Act child welfare system, do you believe all that adds up to genocide? Would you use that term?
As I said, the examination of the residential school chapter, where there was an actual attempt to try and take the Indian out of the child, as the language was used, is a form of cultural genocide, trying to rob that element of someone's being. And it's horrific. And as I said, I'm proud that Prime Minister Harper apologized for that in the House of Commons, and we are striving to reconcile our terrible past with providing full opportunity for Indigenous Canadians today. I've had great conversations with Indigenous leaders in my 7 months as leader so far. I'm hoping to have some strong Indigenous leaders on my team when we form government. And with me, it will be about actions, results, and holding me to account for them, not Mr. Trudeau's approach of promising things and always failing to follow through.
And we'll now take questions in the room. Rachel?
Sure. Hi, Mr. O'Toole. It's Rachel Haynes here from CTV National News. I wanted to talk to you about Minister Sajjan and the ongoing allegations that we've seen against the Canadian Armed Forces leaders. Yesterday, Ray Novak was at the committee and brought up the fact that your Chief of Staff had brought forward rumors that had come from you. So I'd like to know more about what exactly were those rumors that you knew about General Vance. Do you feel like they were investigated properly, and should he have been made the Chief of the Defence Staff in 2015?
Well, thanks, Rachel. First, I was not involved in the decision about selecting the Chief of Defence Staff, but I raised with my Chief of Staff rumors that I had heard that I wanted examined, because we needed to send a clear signal that there could be no outstanding allegations, no error of inappropriate conduct with our Chief of Defence Staff. It was important to me to make sure that that was examined, and I understand it was.
And a few weeks ago, you mentioned that you felt, following the Deschamps Commission, that there needed to be zero tolerance on harassment in the senior ranks. Now, do you believe that since Minister Sajjan decided not to take the allegations from the Ombudsman, should he be resigning over the way he's handled this?
I'm holding Mr. Trudeau to account. In fact, the Prime Minister himself and his office knew of an outstanding allegation made by a woman serving her country, and they ignored it. Not only that, Mr. Trudeau extended the contract of the Chief of Defence Staff and gave him a bonus and a salary increase with an outstanding allegation specifically made to the Ombudsman. I think that was a horrific example of leadership, and there's a crisis of confidence right now. So, Rachel, I've been demanding for a month now an independent investigation, independent of the national defense, and a freeze on salaries and promotions for all general and flag officers. I care deeply about the men and women who serve in uniform. We owe it to them and to women who may want to put their country first and serve to show that they can do so with respect and free of harassment.
Next question, Chris.
Hi, Mr. O'Toole. Chris Reynolds, Canadian Press. The border is one of the few major areas of the pandemic, aside from vaccine procurement and distribution, where the federal government really has a great deal of direct control. So I'm wondering, given pressure from down south and given your call for easing up on lockdowns here, will you be pushing the federal government to start the conversation on how to reopen the border with the U.S.?
Thank you, Chris. We're starting that conversation today. And this is why we're talking about a safe, data-driven, and effective plan to reopening. That will include the border, that will include airports, ports, all areas of federal jurisdiction where there should be a national rapid screening and testing process. The Trudeau government has failed incredibly on the rapid screening and testing. In fact, I've heard recently they actually held up initiatives from the private sector to try and bring solutions to the opening up and testing, because we will likely require some form of screening and testing for the next few years, Chris. So let's see some leadership. We're going to be talking about that today. I hate seeing Canada 3 to 4 steps behind the rest of the developed world throughout this crisis. So Conservatives will be bringing forward the debate today, pushing for a plan and asking the government to table it in 20 days.
Also, you say repeatedly that your party needs to change. What exactly needs to change?
Our party needs to reach out to more Canadians and to make sure that we have policies reflecting their hopes and aspirations in 2021. As I said in my speech, we can't run another election hoping that people will come around to positions we've had. We have to have strong, principled positions to solve the challenges facing Canada today. I want a Canadian recovery to lead the world. That's why I launched a 5-pillar plan in my speech. I also want us to have a serious issue to address our policies to address climate change. I want to make sure we welcome more Canadians into our Conservative movement. And I've said we need more people. If you're worried about Canada trailing on the economy, trailing in deployments, Canadians deserve better than a government that's always 2 steps behind, always a prime minister in ethical lapses and scandals and corruption. It's time for better, and it's time to take another look at the Conservative Party of Canada.
David?
David Thurton, CBC News. Good morning, Mr. O'Toole. I wanted to ask you about an Ontario Superior Court ruling that struck down a section of Canada's Election Act that, broadly speaking, prevents the sharing of false information against candidates or even party leaders like yourself during an election. Do you think the Liberals should have appealed this ruling that struck down that legislation, their legislation?
Thanks, David. I'll have to look at the ruling as a lawyer and certainly a parliamentarian. It's very important to me to review that. I will say this. I've been very disappointed by the misleading approach that we've seen from Mr. Trudeau, Mr. Blair, with respect to my record, some of the front groups that are helping the Liberal Party make claims about me that are certainly not true. The Conservatives will increase support for health. We will do so with the provinces without conditions, without an Ottawa knows best approach. We will partner. I think my experience in uniform and in the private sector is actually positive if we have to get this country working. So it's been sad to see the attacks from the Liberals on me, but I'm going to reach out to Canadians. Canadians know that Canada can do better, and our Conservative team is ready to do that for you in a way that's professional, welcoming, and ethical.
Okay, I just want to ask you another question that my colleague Margaret Evans is working on. Kurdish authorities holding ISIS militants and their family members have, as you know, called on Canada to take its citizens back. But she's been hearing from on the ground in those camps that they're either calling Canada to take its citizens back or support regional tribunals over there to try these ISIS militants who are accused of these crimes. So I'm just wondering, can we get your thoughts on that? What do you think the best approach to deal with this situation should be?
Well, thanks, David. For a few years now, I've said that some of the babies and the infants that were involved in these situations should be returned, and through families. I'm glad some of that has happened. We actually supported that several years ago. But people that left Canada to go and commit terror acts abroad to participate in the activities of ISIS, they should not be repatriated. They should face justice and consequences in that country. So I think we can show compassion for the innocents, but also show a strong zero tolerance for people who take the freedom and opportunity that Canada presents and then go to commit horrific terror acts abroad. I think Canadians do not want to see a repatriation. They want them to be held responsible in those countries.
And last question, David Aikens.
David Aiken, Global News. Good morning. I'm coming back to climate change again myself. So I hear what you're saying, that you can't go to voters again with the stuff that conservative leaders have gone to voters with before. But all we heard on the weekend was the Conservative Party as a whole is not interested in acknowledging climate change is real in their policy document, and you're going to repeal a carbon tax. And I might have something later. That's what came to voters in the last election, the election before that. Your opponents are calling the Conservatives a bunch of political dinosaurs on climate change. Do you want to maybe respond to that risible question of mine there, Mr. O'Toole?
Well, thanks, David. Mr. Trudeau has failed on every measure of his climate change plan. I believe one of your colleagues some time ago highlighted that he missed 99% of his targets. That's consistent with what we see from Mr. Trudeau on everything. They're always behind, they're always failing, they're always explaining. This is why we're going to have a plan that's serious and gets it right. I worked on environmental issues in the private sector. It's important to me, as I said, as a father. You will be pleasantly surprised by our plan, David, and I look forward to talking to you about it. And we will have it out before an election. I don't think there should be an election when I gave a speech to a largely empty room and my family couldn't even be there. Mr. Trudeau seems to think it's an appropriate time for an election. We need vaccines in arms. We need a planned reopening, and that's what we're talking about in Parliament today.
Younger voters, Eastern voters, urban voters are not thinking that the Conservative Party has a second choice if they're not ready to commit. And one of the reasons is, I see on these screens, the Conservative Party doesn't get it when it comes to how to get rid of carbon pollution. Every expert says there's one way. You have to price carbon. Maybe not a carbon tax. There's cap and trade. There's what Premier Kenney's doing in Alberta. So can you commit today that your plan, when you present it to us, will put a price on carbon?
Well, David, what's interesting is I've been talking about smarter plans in the environment for many years, and I look forward to people looking into that. There are about 700 large emitters in this country, David, that account for a third of our emissions as a country. So only Mr. Trudeau and the Liberals would tax 30 million households, single seniors, small business owners, farmers, drying their grain, to try and tackle climate change when they're actually not partnering with the provinces and with large emitters. That is something we're looking at in our plan now, a much smarter and comprehensive approach to climate change. The tax is not working, which is why Mr. Trudeau is tripling it, knowing full well we will lose jobs and investment to the United States. I will be focused on an economic recovery in all regions and in all sectors of this country, and a serious climate change plan too. Stay tuned. I know you'll like it.
And this concludes the press conference. Ceci met fait la conférence de presse. Merci.
Merci beaucoup. Thank you.